It's kind of scary, but not really scary. Let's try something else. Now this is fucking scary. This is the Japanese Imperial Army Victory March on Nanking, 1937. Most of those who still don't know or are unaware of what the Japanese got up to in the, it's what they call the Nanking Incident. It's what the rest of the world refers to as the Rape of Nanking. It was really, really fucking bad. And this is them dancing through the streets. Saying, "We did it, boys." Fucking terrifying. No one comes out a hero once the wash is all clean. My God. Yeah, I'll include a link for that video. I think it's a recreation. It's an obvious recreation from a movie, but even still, hoo boy. And this stuff is even more terrifying when you start looking into some of the, let's say, esoteric beliefs that led up to World War II, that were formulating themselves in the Japanese zeitgeist, which we're going to get into in this edition of Occult Crime Atlas, Japan. Bing bong bong. It's bad. It's bad. I found a lot of stuff on this, and the fact that we are dealing with a large swath of history that is focused on Imperial Japan. I felt that I needed to include it so that you see the formulation of the mind state that is leading up to Imperial Japan becoming the fucking war machine that it is. And I found so much stuff that I'm probably going to have to split this into two parts. I'm going to concentrate this episode, I think, on primarily around circa 1900 to the war. Not specifically during the war, but because the problem is that quote-unquote occult crimes that take place under the auspices of warfare, it's very tricky. It's very hard to define, but I will discuss some of the groups and ideologues that are around in this psychic gumbo that is building up to World War II, and of course a few various crimes that took place involving occult beliefs, etc. And there are a few caveats to that as well. Japan is largely, split between primarily Shinto beliefs and Buddhist beliefs. So while these aren't necessarily schools of occultism, there are offshoots, etc. And these are, to the Western mind, very exotic and strange. And we don't know all the, we're not familiar with a lot of these, how like Christianity has just a ton of lower subsects, etc., and offshoots and so forth. Same way with Buddhism, same way with Shinto. And we will see, leading up to World War II, that state Shinto, and specifically, is, wow, it is just a huge machine that got rolling out as a way to sort of socially unify the Japanese people under a single dominant religious belief system. One that basically encapsulates the essence of what it is to be Japanese in the minds of the people at the time. And man, it goes into some strange, weird places. So yeah, I don't know. I just want to sort of get this out there before we start. Once again, I'm not picking on anybody's religion. I'm not saying that all of these groups or beliefs or practitioners of these groups are dangerous, but they do become that way sometimes. So, anywho, my name is Michael Luck. This is Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast, the podcast. And this is also Occult Crimes Atlas, Part 2, Japan. Get down, get down. No, I'm kidding. I'm having fun. But some of this stuff, seriously, it's fucking scary as shit. No small part due to the fact that there are still many, many, many new religious movements, as well as, let's say, ultra-far-right nationalist groups that still exist in Japan today, who very much want to return to the old ways, the good old days of God, I don't even want to say the war crimes. But, yeah. Anywho, getting into the pitch of this episode, I guess you'd call it. Japan, from the 1910s, we'll say, to the 1930s, saw an unusual convergence of spiritualism, nationalism, and criminal intrigue. And while the country imported Western-style seance culture, it fused with local Shinto and Buddhist beliefs and the rise of mesmerism, of all things as well. Very popular at this time in Japan. Several incidents involved crimes ranging from sexual exploitation under the guise of quote-unquote energy healing to fraud rings posing as spiritual schools. There was even a fellow who was using mesmerism to convey some kind of convoluted stock options plot, and this was in like the 20s or 30s, so I had my pick, but I once again am trying solely to focus on murder, ritual murder. That's where the big thing with this whole occult crimes atlas comes in. So having said that, there are going to be a few caveats as well. We're going to get into the whole imperialist belief system leading up to World War II, so you can once again see how this mutation took place, just how everything just got out of hand. Who buddy? But there are some consistent themes that will be seen through this episode. The historical presence of what are commonly referred to as new religious movements, or Shinshukyo in Japan, though once again, it should be noted that they are not all bad. But most of the ones we'll be talking about most definitely are. The influence of imported Western spiritualist and occult language and structures, the tension between state-sponsored Shinto religion and underground quote-unquote mystic or occult networks, the rise of ultra-nationalist mysticism leading into World War II will be a major aspect of this episode, as these various groups contribute to or influence many of the esoteric beliefs, which would eventually result in what are some of the utmost horrific war crimes ever perpetrated. Also of interest in this episode will be examinations of various official psychical research organizations, as well as groups or individuals illustrating the transition from occult belief systems into proto-UFO cult territory. That may make it into part 2. I don't know. Once again, I have a lot here. So, a final note, while they will be mentioned tangentially, possibly several times, I've basically decided to exclude most mention of Aum Shinrikyo. They've been covered extensively in various forms of media. However, I do find it very interesting that they are still around and have rebranded themselves as Aleph and still exist to this day. It boggles my mind to a degree how exactly such an infamous terrorist doomsday cult was and somehow still is able to simply just reinvent themselves and still be allowed to exist in both Japan and abroad. Very strange, very strange. Also, due to Japan's historical religious connections to Shinto and Buddhist belief systems, many of the seemingly infinite number of esoteric and occult groups can largely be seen, that offshoot from these belief systems, can largely be seen as, once again, far more quote-unquote exotic in nature to the primary Western Judeo-Christian worldview, and it is due to this particular sense of otherness, for lack of a better word, as well as the various occult or esoteric beliefs and practices which exist in many historical Buddhist or Shinto belief systems, as well as the just sheer mind-boggling number, alternative interpretations, etc., that many of the groups eventually mentioned in this episode are essentially going to get the quick, just, I'm going to try to give as much detail as possible without skipping over the fascinating ooey gooey bits. I can only take so much in my brain delving deep into this world. And in particular, as far as the Occult Crimes Atlas goes, a particular focus on murder is going to be the central theme for certain religious groups. However, I once again say that I want to include many of these ultra-nationalist, far-right, esoteric orders, because we get to see how the sausage is made to a degree. And also, like, seriously, just the inclusion of these fascist, ultra-nationalist, esoteric ideologies and groups, that threw like about an extra 1,000 pounds of top ramen in the pot of food for thought on this particular excursion. So I hope you brought your fucking chopsticks, because this one's going to get thick. And by the way, these are all cultural references, not insensitive, ethnically based, lowbrow jokes. I love ramen. I love hane ame cosplay. I love dark 80s and 90s manga and anime, and may one day make an ill-conceived and highly strange spiritual pilgrimage to this endlessly fascinating land of enchantment, likely in some highly misguided attempt at esoteric gonzo anthropology. That's the dream, at least, to eventually become some transhumanist digital consciousness in the holographic kami body of a kawaii yokai. So saddle up, all you bonsai buckaroos, and choose your favorite tokusatsu spirit totem to go ghost riding in the sky and ride into the rising sun. After these words from our sponsors. You know, after a several days, if not weeks long slog through the vast repertoire of global occult crime, you really want to drink. Seems to be the only thing that'll help. And, you get to drinking, like you do, and sooner or later, you're going to have to deal with a hangover. It's no good. It's no darn good. Luckily, there's a cure for hangovers. That's Liqueur Gummies. Liquure Gummies. They combine DHA, milk thistle, B vitamins, and ginger root to help your body recover after drinking. They fight fatigue, nausea, and dehydration, so you'll wake up feeling refreshed. Try them for faster recovery and enjoy an exclusive discount with my promo code ICON, ICON, at liqueur, liquure.com for 20% off any product exclusive from your total cart purchase. Thank you. And when you're dealing with the high-stress world of occult crime that lurks in every little corner and nook and cranny of this world, you can get a little anxious inside. Who'd have thunk it, you know? But luckily, there's Shimmerwood Beverages. Shimmerwood's an award-winning CBD seltzer, combining full-spectrum CBD with natural fruit shrubs, delivering a refreshing, stress-relieving drink that eases tension and promotes relaxation. And you can enjoy an exclusive discount with my promo code ICON, ICON, at shimmerwood.com for 30% off any product exclusively through Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast. Thank you. All right, saddle up, Daisy May, because from here on out, it's Dark City. Like, just letting you know ahead of time. Get ready. Some of this shit is pure nightmare fuel. Now, once again, it should be said, much as at the beginning of Occult Crime Atlas Volume 1, Brazil, there may be some translation problems here. Japanese is notoriously hard to translate into English. I went through these several times, back and forth. So I want to make sure that I'm always giving you the most accurate information. No, some of this stuff you can't help but be confronted with sensationalistic reporting. So I want to give you the facts as best I can and make sure that these are actual verified incidents that occurred. So I may be mentioning sources right off the end of each incident or what have you. And as far as the inclusion of all this far-right ultra-nationalist stuff, this is what leads up to many, many, many murders. So once again, I felt it important to include this. And do I see a parallel with today's modern America? You bet your sweet bippy I do, because as soon as a country starts talking about shit like a unifying religious identity and things like that, you need to fucking run away scared. Or, I don't know, pick up your, I don't know, whatever you do in that situation. We'll find out soon, I'm sure. Anywho, so jumping right into it, we've got the 1921 Nagoya Seance murder. This is an incident, we'll say. You hear me use that word a lot, probably. It revolved around a small group who killed a woman during a trance ceremony, believing her body was to be a vessel for Amaterasu, the sun goddess. The leader was convicted and claimed divine possession. This is one of the more disturbing and significant early spiritualist murder cases in Japan, often referenced in period psychiatric and police literature as an example of Shinkosha no Hakai, or the destructive power of belief. Some of these incidents, I found varying reportage of. So some will say the basic story, but there'll be changes in the details. So when that happens, I will try to provide both, but lean towards or indicate which is the more widely believed series of events that took place. So having said that, back to it. This occurred in the Nagoya City, Aichi Prefecture, specifically a residential compound in the Atsuta district near Atsuta Shrine. The leader, or the people convicted, include the leader of this group, who went by the name of Yamazaki Iwataro, a male, 45-year-old self-styled spiritual healer and trance medium. The victim was named Shimada Kiku, a female, 27-year-old unmarried domestic worker and participant in the group. The followers present, 5 to 6 total other people, including Yamazaki's wife and sister-in-law, did nothing. As these events unfolded, they just sat around dumbfounded. The beliefs of the group, they claim to receive spirit revelations from Amaterasu Omikami, the Shinto sun goddess, the long, long lost great-great-grandmammy of the emperors of Japan, who was said to be preparing for a new embodiment in human flesh. The leader, Yamazaki, taught that certain women could become yorimashi, or spirit vessels, through ritual purification, fasting, and trance dancing. The group practiced a hybrid system of Shinto mysticism, magnetic healing, and pseudo-Christian eschatology, believing that a cosmic judgment was imminent. Boy, those groups are always fun. February 1921, during an intense overnight trance ceremony, Yamazaki announced that Kiku had been chosen by divine revelation to serve as the vessel for Amaterasu. She was stripped, painted with red and gold pigment, and subjected to an extended rite involving chanting, water fasting, and light infusion through breath and laying on of hands. After entering a catatonic or dissociative state, Kiku was repeatedly struck, cut, and eventually asphyxiated. Her death was interpreted by the group as the final shedding of her human coil. Yamazaki was arrested in 48 hours after a neighbor alerted police to suspicious screaming and religious chanting. Yeah, thanks. At trial, he claimed divine possession and insisted he had no memory of the killing, which prompted a psychiatric evaluation. But luckily, he was found legally sane, though exhibiting religious megalomania and messiah complex symptoms. How about that? He was convicted of manslaughter as opposed to full murder, which was a very controversial ruling, and sentenced to 14 years of penal servitude. So I hope he was digging ditches with the best of them. Several followers received lesser sentences for complicity or concealment. This was widely reported in Tokyo and Nagoya newspapers as an example of quote-unquote fanatical new religions gone astray. And you're going to see that characterization of many of these quote-unquote new religious orders, especially in the build-up to World War II and the eventual installation of state Shinto. There's a huge building sort of background idea of like Japan has become corrupted by outside spiritual influences, etc. And many of these cases are going to be used in that. They will provide the state with the the much needed ammunition to eventually get away with what they want to do. This case was referenced in early Ministry of Justice circulars warning local prefectures to monitor unsanctioned sex and trance circles. Yamazaki's writings from prison were later collected and distributed by another fringe sect in the 1930s as supposed sacred wisdom. This group was quietly suppressed by the Home Ministry, and that's another thing you'll see a lot. These groups, they'll pop up just out of nowhere for a while, and then, oh, where'd they go? What happened to them? No formal sect name was ever recorded for Yamazaki's group. Sometimes it was lumped in with pre-modern new Shinto cults in post-war sociological circles. The police case records from Aichi Prefecture still exist, but are apparently largely inaccessible without direct archival permissions. This is actually just I was able to come through various criminal, I guess it would be like criminal psychological profiling, because there was a huge sweep in modernization at this time in Japan that, it started viewing certain spiritual practices in the lens of psychiatric medicine. So they'll occasionally be these weird leftover remnants in these criminal and psychiatric journals of cases like this, and oh my god, they are special. Okay, so this actually is just one of many cases of what's called Yoramashi murders that have taken place in Japan. Now, Yoramashi is a Japanese term that refers to a human medium who serves as a vessel for a kami, which is a deity, a spirit, or supernatural force, during a ritual or trance. The word comes from yori, to approach, possess, or inhabit, and mashi, to sit or be seated, which often indicates a host or a vessel. A Yoramashi is not necessarily a permanent spiritual figure like a priest or shaman. Instead, they're typically chosen or prepared for temporary possession. They're used in Shinto folk and spiritualist ceremonies, treated as temporary bodies of the divine, or sometimes even the dead, during rituals. And sometimes they are children, virgins, or mentally fragile individuals believed to be spiritually pure or receptive. So, unfortunately, the potential for bad stuff happening is just, it's too high. But once again, also, throughout many, cultures and shamanistic belief systems, this is always kind of there's a sort of an outsider status associated to people like this. There are related concepts such as kuchiyose, which is spirit summoning, or the act of spirit summoning, Reibai, which is a sort of general medium, or kamigakari, which is a state of divine possession. Now, that's just one narrative to this particular case. However, the more widely accepted and, I guess, slightly more nuanced or detailed narrative says that in 1921, the Nagoya Seance murder, this is another documented pre-war Japanese occult crime. It hasn't been as widely discussed in English as the Niigata or Saitama cases, which we'll get to later, but shows up in criminology and police records of the era under what they call psychical seance murder case. That's what it was largely referred to at the time. So, early 1921, Nagoya, Aichi Prefecture, a group of spiritualists in Nagoya had been holding seances, or koreikai, influenced by Western spiritualism, but mixed with Japanese folk beliefs. And this is another thing. A lot of these occur out in the boonies, so people are they're having make-em-ups and just spiritual improv class, doing who knows what. They're just taking things and running with them and doing whatever. So the medium/leader, in this instance, it says it was a man named Yoshikawa, whose surname was confirmed in police record summaries. He presented himself as a trance medium who could summon ancestral spirits and divine guidance. He practiced automatic writing, which is another big thing that you'll see a lot, and trance possession. He convinced followers that malicious spirits could cling to the living and only drastic acts could sever the connection. During the seance, Yoshikawa declared that one participant, a young woman in her late teens who is not named in this instance, was possessed by a vengeful spirit. He ordered that the spirit must be quote-unquote driven out by striking her violently while in trance. The group proceeded to beat her, and Yoshikawa escalated the ritual until she collapsed and died. Yoshikawa later claimed her death was necessary and that her body had been sacrificed to save the circle. Police arrested Yoshikawa and several seance participants. Yoshikawa insisted in court that the girl's soul had been freed and that he had acted under spirit instructions. He was convicted of homicide, though the followers received lighter sentences. Newspapers sensationalized it as the seance tragedy, framing it as an imported Western fad, i.e., spiritualism, gone wrong on Japanese soil. The case contributed to the growing suspicion of Western occult practices in Japan, which were often contrasted with proper state Shinto. See? This is the early Taisho period, roughly the 1910s to 20s, when Western spiritualism and psychical research had become fashionable in big cities like Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya. Japanese interest was strong enough that the Society for Psychical Research of Japan was founded in 1910. This case, in 1921, became one of the earliest fatal examples of seance activity turning violent in Japan. Along with other incidents, it fueled the view in both government and mainstream press that unlicensed mediums and occultists were public dangers. Yes, this case is real. It's been documented in Aichi Prefectural Police Archives, 1921 trial notes with a summary that appears in post-war criminology textbooks, also appears in Japanese legal commentary under murder due to religious/spiritual fanaticism. It's cited briefly in Shuichi Kato's Cultural Histories of Taisho Japan when discussing imported occultism. In the context of the Nagoya seance murder, the woman who was killed was likely seen as a Yoramashi, as mentioned before, for Amaterasu, the sun goddess, meaning the group believed her body was required, through death or trance, for the sun goddess to enter this world. Several other such Yoramashi murders have been committed, including this next one. Lordy, okay. The 1926 Tatori, and you're gonna hear me butcher some Japanese. It's unfortunate, but that's gonna happen. Sorry. Tatori Child Oracle Sacrifice. Yikes. The location was Kurayoshi Tatori Prefecture, a rural Shinto-derived sect led by a female mystic named Fukuda Nae, believed to channel Sarutahiko no Okami, which is a guardian deity. A 7-year-old girl was designated as a child oracle and subjected to near starvation and forced trance chanting. She died after convulsing for several hours. The group claimed she had become too pure, quote-unquote, and had to ascend to the divine plane. I'm not quite sure what that means exactly. Too pure? Okay, strange. No burial was performed, and her body was left covered in flowers until it was later discovered. Fukuda was convicted of criminal negligence leading to the death, and her shrine was dismantled. This one is also real, though, like the Nagoya seance murder, it's buried mostly in Japanese criminology and regional police reports rather than in widely available English sources. It's usually referred to as the Totori Child Oracle Incident. The Japanese really love the term incident. It's another one of those bullshit euphemisms that really just glosses everything over nice and clean in a tight little package. In contemporary write-ups and later criminologist class, it is a ritual murder under delusional religious belief. The 1926 Totori Child Oracle Sacrifice, it's the Taisho 15, just before the Showa era, in the rural Totori Prefecture. A small rural religious circle led by a woman described in reports as a Miko-like shaman, sometimes called an Atako in the press, though that's a northern term. Miko is like a shrine maiden, like a nun, sort of, at a Shinto shrine, whereas an Atako is a blind female medium. There are certain spiritual beliefs up north that believe that women stricken with blindness are also gifted with supernatural abilities, mediumistic skills, etc. This woman had gained local followers by claiming she could channel the gods or kami and receive oracles through a child medium. The child in question was a girl about 6 or 7 years old, was considered a child oracle, a vessel of divine voice. The leader, who taught that the gods demanded blood sacrifice to avert coming disaster, in some versions to heal illness in the community, in others to ward off a crop failure. She declared that the child medium herself was quote-unquote chosen by the gods to be offered. The group performed a ritual in which the child was cut and bled to death in what was framed as a purification sacrifice. Participants claimed that they were acting under the Miko's divine command and that the child had been willing as an oracle. Police investigated after neighbors reported the disappearance. The body was discovered and the cultists arrested. The shamanic leader was convicted of murder with religious fanatic motive and sentenced to a long prison term. Some records suggest life imprisonment, others 20 plus years. I don't pretend to know the ins and outs of early 20th century Japanese jurisprudence, but only one of those seems like the right way to go. Several followers were also punished, though less severely. Newspapers sensationalized it as a survival of barbarous kami sacrifice. It was lumped with other rural superstition murders of the 1920s and 30s to argue for modernization and suppression of folk religion. This fits squarely into a cluster of ritual homicide cases in Japan between 1920 to 1940, roughly, approximately, often linked to trance states, folk shamanism, and quote-unquote new religions. Authorities framed it as a primitive superstition persisting in the countryside in contrast to the state-approved rationalized Shinto. One of these rare cases where a child oracle, quote-unquote, a very old Shinto Buddhist trope, was explicitly sacrificed in modern Japan, relatively modern Japan. Yes, this case is documented, referenced in Japanese criminal law commentaries under religious or ritual homicide, summarized in post-war criminology surveys of Taisho and early Showa crimes. Period newspapers such as Asahi Shimbun and regional Tottori Press ran lurid coverage in 1926. Once again, some of these, you're going to get two different stories on some of these, and I want to include both whenever that's possible. So some of the details will match up, and some are, it just depends on the source. Next up, we've got the 1933 Niigata trance decapitation. This took place in northern Niigata Prefecture, a remote fishing village, an offshoot of the Omoto-kyo Shinto religious group, or the name Omoto-kyo means great source or great origin, and it was a Shinto-based new religion founded in the 1890s by an illiterate female medium who wrote 200,000 prophecies while possessed by a spirit. They'll come up again. Though this was very heavily altered by local folk practices in this incident. A 32-year-old male follower was decapitated, a 32-year-old male follower was declared the vessel of, oh boy, here we go, Amino Mina Kanushi, the primordial deity. During a possession trance, the leader ordered his head to be liberated to complete his transformation. The act was carried out by two teenage acolytes with a ritual blade. The severed head was placed on a homemade shrine and adorned with incense and coins. The group was charged with homicide and body desecration. Two minors were institutionalized afterwards. The leader claimed he was enacting, quote-unquote, heaven's orders and was executed by hanging in 1935. Now, the alternative and probably more detail-oriented telling of this is 1933, rural Niigata Prefecture, northwest coast of Honshu, a region long associated with folk mysticism and possession traditions. A young man, sometimes described as a farmer's son in his late teens or early 20s, reportedly entered what is known as a Mugen Jotai, a dreamlike trance state, after participating in a local folk spiritual practice, possibly a Shugindo-influenced possession ritual. During this trance, he is said to have exhibited uncontrollable strength and violent mania. While in this altered state, he decapitated a female relative, so it wasn't the possessed guy, it was the possessed guy doing the decapitation, sometimes recorded as being his sister, sometimes an aunt. Accounts stress the suddenness and the ritualistic feel of the act. The victim was said to have been sitting in a prayer-like position, and the killing weapon was a sickle. The man reportedly claimed that a kami, or local deity, or otherwise noted as a Mujina, which is a badger yokai spirit, also commonly linked with possession lore, and we'll get into more of that down the road as well. It had apparently seized his head, in his words, and commanded the act. The authorities declared him insane, and the case was filed under, quote, homicide during trance madness, unquote, a known legal category in interwar Japan tied to folk beliefs about spirit possession. Contemporary Niigata regional papers covered it as a Kyoki Jiiken, I'm probably butchering that, or a madness incident, but also indulged in supernatural framing. A 1930s Tokyo sensationalist magazine reportedly picked it up, spinning it into a story of Shinto black magic and ancestral curses. The case sits at the crossroads of Japanese folk trance possessions and traditions such as Kuchiyose mediumship, Itako shamans, as mentioned earlier, and modern legal medical attempts to classify mental illness. Japan in the 1920s and 30s had several incidents where murders were blamed on spirit commands, or kami no meirei. These were often tied to trance states, epilepsy, or psychotic breaks, but framed socially as supernatural seizures. The Niigata case became particularly infamous because of the extreme violence, i.e. decapitation, and the ritual-like staging. Unlike many urban legend crimes, and that's been a huge problem in trying to do a lot of the research in this, Japan has had urban legends since the beginning of the 20th century. They go way back. And once again, certain sensationalized crimes get the urban legend treatment. So you have to really parse out what has been recorded and what has been sensationalized. But yeah, unlike many urban legend crimes, this one does appear in Japanese criminal records of the 1930s. It's occasionally cited in post-war criminological literature under, quote, religious madness murder, unquote. However, the folkloric embellishments such as kami possession, yokai influence, trance magic, etc., come largely from the media sensationalism and oral retellings in the decades after. Next up, 1937, we've got the Saitama fire purification murders. This is something that took place in Kasukabe, Saitama Prefecture. The group involved was a spirit fire cult known as Hino Michi no Mano, or Those of the Paths of the Fire. During a midsummer night ceremony, 2 adult women were burned alive in a bonfire ritual, allegedly as offerings to cleanse the earth before a divine descent. The sect leader, Kawataba Ho, told authorities that the women had volunteered their mortal shells to accelerate the apocalypse. Kawabata was declared insane and institutionalized for life. The group scattered, and some members reappear in post-war new religions in Tokyo under different names. However, once again, there's the more, I would say, probably more accurate alternative narrative to this story. The 1937 Saitama fire purification murders took place in Saitama Prefecture, north of Tokyo, which was still then semi-rural. A middle-aged man named Shiro Ishida, sometimes recorded slightly differently in prefectural records. He was known locally as a faith healer and a lay religious practitioner, blending folk Shinto, Shugendo, and new religion elements. He claimed to have the ability to purify people through fire. Watch out. Ishida had become convinced that Japan was being spiritually polluted by invisible forces, sometimes framed as kegare, or unclean spirits. He believed that only purification by fire could save the afflicted. Not metaphorically, but literally burning the body to release and cleanse the spirit. Ishida gathered a small circle of followers in his home. He convinced them that one of the members, a young woman, sometimes described as sickly, quote unquote, was possessed by evil forces. As part of a ritual, he doused her in oil and set her on fire in front of the group, claiming that this would, quote unquote, purify her. When she died screaming, he justified it by saying her soul had been freed. Some reports suggest he attempted to repeat the act with another follower before neighbors intervened. Ishida was arrested and charged with murder. In testimony, he remained convinced that he had not killed, but rather saved the victim. Contemporary psychiatrists classified him under religious mania. This is widely sensationalized as a case of fanatical religious murder. Newspapers highlighted his mix of pseudo-Shinto and folk magic, and the term, purification by fire, quote unquote, became a kind of shorthand for cultish madness in the 1930s in Japan. This case fit into a broader late Taisho, early Showa panic around fanatic fringe religions. In the 1920s to 30s, dozens of micro-sects proliferated, many blending apocalyptic visions, Shugendo magic, and nationalist myth. Most were harmless. A few produced bizarre crimes like this one. Authorities, already cracking down on leftists and dangerous thought, quote-unquote, began to treat unregistered religious activity as a potential threat to public order. And cases like Ishida's helped justify those repressions. Yes, this case is real. It appears in a 1937 prefectural police record and is summarized in post-war Japanese criminology texts under religious murder. The folkloric purification by fire framing comes straight from Ishida's own testimony, not just press exaggeration. Now, there are cases of spirit possession that are. This is actually an extremely fascinating aspect of Japan's stranger spiritual side. It's often used in numerous religious contexts, and how to put it, there was one particular group in the late 1800s, coming into the 1900s, that sort of codified a version of spirit invocation, I guess, of controlled spirit possession, and like just the system of how to do it and just bring down a spirit into your body for whatever purpose, usually to act as some kind of oracle. But there are psychogenic or quote-unquote possession-induced violence cases in the rural areas. Once again, it's these rural areas. 1920s to 1930s era. Most of these cases were scattered incidents in rural Japan involving group trances, the aforementioned yoramashi, or spirit oracle, kami oracles, faith healings that escalated into abuse and sometimes death, sometimes attributed to fox spirit possession, or a kitsune. This is a big cultural thing in Japan, the possession by fox spirits, or sometimes a dog, or sometimes a badger / raccoon dog thing. There's various certain wild animals that are very strongly associated with spirit possession, and those are just a few. But psychiatric literature documents cases where intense possession rituals led to violence. People speaking or acting as animals, self-harm, or even accidental fatalities during ecstatic trances. These were classified medically as psychogenic reactions or dissociative states. So once again, we're in this era where everything is modernizing, and you're starting to see the medical explanations for things that have been around in this culture for centuries. So these are rarely prosecuted as murder, but cited in medical or legal journals as ritual-induced tragedies. These examples show a sort of a continuum, a system, I guess, if you will, in early 20th century Japan, where spirit possession, especially involving ritual mediums or yoramashi, intersected tragically or illegally with physical harm or coercion. In each case, belief systems, whether rural, Shinto-derived, or hybrid spiritualism, were deployed in ways that sometimes led to violence or judicial scrutiny. I've got 3 specific cases here, documented episodes from early 20th century Japan, in which spirit possession, particularly fox spirit or kitsune possession, led to violent or harmful situations. These are drawn from medical, folkloric, and historical sources. Episode 1, Violent Exorcism Attempts. This is in the Izumo region, late Edo to modern period. This is a little outside of our time frame, but it's a good illustrator of what these incidents entail. In the Izumo area, kitsune suke, or fox possession cases, sometimes led to severe physical abuse as families sought to expel the spirit. Folklorist Lafcadio Hearn recorded that victims were often beaten or even burned in attempts to force out the fox spirit. These harsh exorcism measures occasionally caused serious injury or death. Victims, even after being quote-unquote cured, frequently suffered ostracism and lasting discrimination by their communities. In many of these old folk beliefs, anyone who's been possessed by one of these spirits, specifically fox and dog spirits from what I can tell, these, more than anything, seem to have some sort of ancestral, I don't know, like a stain, a corruption, as viewed from outside by people who aren't in the family. So basically, one member of a family is subject to one of these bouts of spirit possession, and it basically puts a taint, a spiritual taint, just a big old taint on this whole family from there on out. There was the Hiroshima True Fox case. This is a mid-20th century report in psychiatric literature. Mexican-American psychiatrist Morris E. Oppler and Japanese psychiatrist Robert Sato Hashima investigated a Hiroshima area case in the early 20th century. There was a young woman who believed she was possessed by a fox and began exhibiting violent behavior during household exorcism rituals, including agitated movements and aggressive resistance. Okay. During an exorcism with ritual flames, i.e., pine leaf burning is big in many of these thought and belief systems as well. The fox spirit was expelled, but the fire injured the woman, and physicians reported it caused physical harm. So this is like a slight. That's not too bad, you know? We heard in our last episode, and in many other cases, where quote-unquote exorcisms can quickly escalate into some really heinous shit. Up next, we've got a psychiatric case study of Kitsune Suke. Dr. Kishi, name withheld, described treating a middle-aged woman taken to the ER in a fox possession-induced dissociative seizure. The woman growled like a fox, crawled on all fours, and spoke nonsensically, frightening the medical staff. She remained unconscious for over 10 hours following sedation, and though not resulting in physical harm to others, her case was life-threatening and illustrates how possession-induced states could escalate dangerously without proper medical care. The folk symptoms of fox possession, like just mentioned, speaking as a fox, craving tofu or azuki beans. This is like a folkloric thing that just like plays in to the whole fox spirit possession thing. Lumps moving under the skin were well-known triggers for rumors, fear, and sometimes violence by relatives or communities. These phenomena were also long recognized in Japanese psychiatry as culture-bound dissociative states and occasionally appeared in legal testimony or mental health evaluations when behavior turned extreme. These documented episodes shed light on the real-world dangers of Kitsune Suke far beyond folklore, where belief, triggered by physical suffering or community conflict or serious psychiatric emergencies, they add further stigma to such fox spirit possession cases. Many believe these afflictions to have additional hereditary aspects, causing entire family lineages to be ostracized or considered cursed. And it wasn't just fox spirits this phenomena was always attributed to either. While folk beliefs often considered certain family lineages to be in league with various animal spirits, most notably inugami, or dog spirits, as mentioned earlier, in fact, there still exist detailed ritual instructions on how one can attain or create one of their very own inugami spirit familiars, which contains just awful animal cruelty and research at your own discretion. Now, if you're anything like me, you may have had a slight brain glitch double take back there after hearing something I mentioned, just breezing through for a moment. Yes, lumps moving under the skin. I want to revisit. This is one of the weirdest and most disturbing folkloric symptoms of fox possession in Japan. It's widely attested in ethnographic and folkloric sources, and was even treated as a semi-clinical symptom by early Japanese psychiatrists and doctors of the Meiji Taisho period, roughly 1868 to 1912 and 1912 to 1926, respectively. What are these moving lumps? In folklore and medical literature, they are described as small grape to egg-sized swellings or masses that seem to move or crawl beneath the victim's skin, especially along the abdomen or the limbs. Some believe it was the fox spirit physically entering or exiting the body. Others interpret it as a manifestation of the fox's tail or fetus, because some stories claim the fox had given birth inside the host. In other cases, the movement was visible to others, and some it was only felt by the possessed. This belief likely originated from psychosomatic symptoms. Victims under extreme stress or disassociation might have felt numbness, twitching, or muscle spasms they couldn't explain, interpreted as something moving inside them. Either way, it's fucking terrifying. Delirium, group hysteria, and many possession outbreaks, particularly in schools or rural villages. Collective expectation of symptoms helped, quote-unquote, confirm what everyone was looking for. So it's, confirmation bias. Scholarly diagnosis of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Doctors in Japan recorded the belief without fully discrediting it. Some even published reports on moving abdominal masses as a very real phenomena. This is absolute body horror nightmare fuel. I've got 3 fleshed out, no pun intended, historical accounts, including both folkloric and medical sources. Case 1, the rice merchant's daughter. This is the late Edo period, again, 1603 to 1868. Shimane Prefecture in the Izumo region. This is sourced from Lafcadio Hearn's Glimpses of an Unfamiliar Japan, 1894. A respected rice merchant's daughter began acting erratically, laughing uncontrollably, speaking in a low voice, claiming to be a fox, and refusing food except for fried tofu and azuki beans. The local Yamabushi, which are like mountain wizard, hermit, ascetics, were called in to exorcise this spirit. During the ritual, witnesses claimed to see something moving under the girl's skin that was, quote, like a rat running through a sack. The movement started at her side and traveled up toward her chest before stopping. The exorcist declared that this was the fox's attempt to flee. After repeated chanting and beating of drums, the girl fainted. When she awoke, the movement was gone. She bore bruises around her body and had no memory of the events. Ugh, God. Case 2, the crawling tumor. Already gross. This is Meiji era medical report. Meiji 33 is roughly the year 1900. And this is at the Tokyo Psychiatric Institute. The source on this is a Professor Takuji Fujinami, Nihon Minzoku Shinrigaku Genkyu, Japanese Folk Psychology Studies Archival Collection. A 28-year-old woman was brought to the hospital after her family had failed to drive out what they believed was a fox spirit possessing her. She complained of a quote-unquote hard knot crawling inside her belly, causing extreme pain and panic. Her family and neighbors swore they saw the lump move, and when examined, a doctor noted visible muscle contractions that seemed to migrate across her body. They suspected hysteria or severe psychosomatic trauma, but a full exploratory procedure was ruled out due to lack of consent. I would give consent to check out my whole body if there was some kind of lump just moving around. I don't know. That's just me. Maybe I'm just a little more open to these things, I guess. These things being doctorly examinations of moving lumps underneath my skin. The episode revolved spontaneously after she was sedated for several days, and no lasting mass was found. Nevertheless, the attending physician concluded the phenomena was, quote, consistent with culturally mediated possession states. So once again, you have this weird chicken or the egg kind of thing going on with certain folk beliefs and the physiological symptoms that come with them. Like, is this stuff, is it manifested by the mind? Like, and the myths and the stories that you know? Or is this stuff just record of something that's happened before? A very ill-defined, unknown overall phenomena that has been taking place for who knows how long. I also find it strange that, for those who don't know, the old-timey definition of the word hysteria, it was used to psychologically, pigeonhole women who were considered kooky, crazy, etc., but it also meant that their womb was traveling around their bodies. So, weird parallel. I don't know. Case 3. Schoolgirls fox possession epidemic. This is also in the Taisho era in the Akita Prefecture. Yanagita Kunio, an oral folklore specialist, I guess, he archived this in a book called Tano Monogatari Zokuhin. A group of schoolgirls at a rural middle school began experiencing fainting spells and screaming fits and uncontrollable shaking. One girl cried out that a fox had entered her stomach. She lifted her blouse and claimed a tail was writhing beneath her skin. Several classmates claimed they saw something pulse under her ribs, though teachers saw no external signs. The school temporarily closed, and local shrine priests performed a mass fox banishing rite. The girls gradually recovered, but villagers whispered that the kitsune had simply moved on to another host. There are tons and tons of these fox spirit possession cases. These few may be the more close to modern, medically well known, or at least have a medical a medical aspect brought to them in the studies of these phenomenon. But I would love to find more of these cases like this. It's and the Inugami thing I mentioned earlier, the how to make a dog god spirit familiar thing. Once again, it's just awful. It's awful. I don't know. I don't like animal cruelty at all whatsoever, but it is very strange. It's something that still exists apparently in rural areas where you basically ritualistically perform a very horrific instance of animal abuse, and somehow the spirit of this dog that you treat like fucking horrible shit becomes connected to your family. It's very, I don't know. There's a lot of these sort of rituals that exist from, ages ago that still persist to this day. It's very strange. I don't know. Now, another particular bit of interest, as I said before, is I wanted to talk about some of the early overlap between spirit or mystical or occult thought with early proto-UFO cult beliefs. So of particular interest in this section is a man called Kagawa Seiji. He was kicking around Japan circa the 1930s. There's a lot of just, records are spotty at best from that era. But he provides another excellent example of the shift from more well-established old-school spiritualist practices clearly transitioning into more New Age proto-UFO cult beliefs. He was the founder of a neo-Shinto spiritual healing movement, mixing automatic writing, and UFO-like etheric messages. Now, he claimed to receive divine instruction through mirror-gazing trances. He ended up eventually being institutionalized after multiple seizures and attempting to perform self-mummification to become a spirit immortal. This is a process known as Soku Shinbutsu, and it is highly, illegal. For one thing now, it's very frowned upon. But there are certain very esoteric Buddhist groups that practice this still. It's a form of self-mummification where you just stop eating and enter a dense state of meditation and just sort of waste away into this sort of like living, not living, but a sort of religious relic of a monk or whatever. There are examples of this that can be seen around the world. So while Kagawa Seiji is little known in the West, he has been mentioned in obscure Japanese mental health reports from the 1940s. There's limited direct material in English on Kagawa, but the name appears in Japanese psychiatric and religious studies archives over often transliterated variability, we'll say. So he goes by Kagawa Seiji, Seiji no Kamigami, Kagawa no Kamiwaza, etc. But the following is essentially a composite based on what is available. So Seiji Kagawa, active roughly in the time of 1928 to 1936, was a quasi-Shinto mystic, self-declared oracle, and a spirit healer who operated in the Kansai region of Japan. He claimed to receive messages from quote-unquote celestial vehicles or quote-unquote mirrored spheres, visible only during ritual trance. These were described in surviving notes and testimonies as, quote, burning orbs rotating in the void, or, quote, mirrored globes descending over pine trees, and, quote, light ships that pass silently above the soul. He taught that enlightened beings living in the upper sky realms, not as deities, but as guardians from a pre-human race who are sent to monitor and advise select humans. The proto-UFO cult traits here that are very interesting, and this is from the 30s. God damn it, it's from the 30s. This is so interesting. Etheric spacecraft. He described these vehicles of light that transported spirits across, quote, the borderlands of this world and the next. He used automatic writing, like many of these groups did back in the day. He received messages from quote-unquote sky beings, and these were received through mirror-gazing rituals, followed by compulsive writing or hypergraphia in archaic kana script. For those unfamiliar, Japan has several forms of alphabet, some older than others, and some. It actually goes into some weird, interesting places. I can't get too deep into it now, but there's a whole like occult practice of certain spirits that inhabit certain letters. So when words are spelled certain way with certain characters, they have certain mystical properties to them. It's very interesting. Check it out if you're interested. He practiced what was known, well, what would today be called an ascension doctrine, basically. Like, followers were taught that they could, quote, shed the body and join the sky realm if they performed purification rites for 49 days. So he was into ritual fasting and self-mummification, as mentioned earlier. Kagawa attempted the Soku Shinbutsu process, the esoteric Buddhist death ritual, to become a living relic, but under a new cosmological framework. In 1936, after being found naked in a cave near Mount Tsurugi, surrounded by his written messages from the sky, he was declared mentally unfit and dangerous. Reports filed at the time described him as, quote, speaking unknown words in a high-pitched voice during trances, claiming the stars were signaling him through pine needle patterns, and attempting to blindfold a boy and prepare him for sky transition, quote unquote. He was institutionalized at Wakayama Prefectural Hospital, where he remained until his death in the early 1940s. Several of his scrolls were kept by local New Religions researchers, some of whom noted their similarities to post-war UFO cult language. Kagawa may be one of the earliest recorded figures to bridge traditional spiritual trance work and aerial light phenomena using language almost identical to contactee rhetoric 20 years before Kenneth Arnold or George Adamski. Further expanding on what we can reasonably establish from the very limited but tantalizing references in Japanese psychiatric, folkloric, and religious studies archives, we've got included here specific archival identifiers and citations were available at the end. Kagawa Seiji, Mirror Prophecies and Sky Beings, dates active 1927 to 1936. Primary region Wakayama and Tokushima prefectures, Kansai, Japan, known for combining pre-war neo-Shinto spiritual healings, esoteric Buddhist practices, mirror trance oracles, and aerial light entity worship. Kagawa Seiji emerged in a period of intense flux in Japanese folk religion, influenced by imperial Shinto revivalism, rural healing cults, and the remnants of Shugendo, or mountain asceticism. Once again, the Yamabushi, there is some argument to be made for like these mountain wizards, the Shugendo and the Yamabushi, etc., being sort of a folkloric template for the creature or yokai known as the Tengu, but that's all heavily speculative. Anywho, his teachings drew heavily from Kagami Kyo, or mirror teaching, which is the sacred use of a polished bronze mirror for divination or channeling kami. There's Umoto Kyo and Omoto Kyo and Kurozumikyo, which were syncretic. Try one more time. Umoto Kyo and Kurozumikyo, which were syncretic Shinto movements that emphasized spiritual possession and automatic writing. There's Kukai's esoteric Buddhist cosmology, filtered through his own cosmogenesis of, quote, celestial spheres beyond the eight-petal lotus world. But rather than divine kami, in a traditional sense, Kagawa claimed to receive signals from pre-human sky guardians, quote-unquote, pre-human sky guardians, entities that existed outside of normal time. Kagawa would stare into a ritual bronze mirror while burning pine resin and inhaled camphor-laced smoke. I bet that was wild. Witnesses described him entering a fugue-like state and producing automatic writings in archaic Kuzushiji kana, which he claimed were messages from celestial beings. Kagawa's texts describe glittering discs floating above the pine trees, flashing stars that descend and dance, and burning mirrors that deliver the voice of the old world. These visions were explicitly linked to his other sky cosmology, where beings of light pass messages to chosen souls via dream, trance, or sky signs. He introduced a 49-day rite of purification involving fasting, mirror gazing, and sky pattern decoding. My God, I can only imagine the Pi level-esque, the movie Pi level-esque, just a beautiful mind going insane with that shit. Sky pattern decoding. After which the follower would allegedly become ready to shed their physical shell and join the sky realms as a quote-unquote etheric guardian. Kagawa's followers believed he could become a living immortal through a modified version of the Soku Shinbutsu self-mummification process. However, his method mixed Buddhist austerity with cosmic rebirth, viewing the preserved corpse as a sky chrysalis. So essentially, he was going to do the whole Soku Shinbutsu self-mummification process, except his version, this just turns him into like a cocoon with some kind of weird like light energy being coming out. It's pretty fucking badass, I think. But I don't know. I guess he didn't get away with that. In late 1936, following the disappearance of 2 adolescent followers from a village near Mount Tsurugi, later found unharmed but quote-unquote entranced and dehydrated, Kagawa was apprehended after being found in a cave, once again naked, covered in pine sap, surrounded by scrolls written in a quote-unquote nonsensical kana, claiming to be preparing the boy for celestial rebirth, the boy that he's found in the cave with. According to archived Wakayama Prefectural Police health records and Wakayama Shimbun coverage, dated October 3rd, 1936, he was declared a danger to himself and others, diagnosed with a dissociative psychotic episode, then categorized under, quote, spirit soul nervous illness, unquote, and institutionalized at Wakayama Prefectural Psychiatric Institute. There are, however, a few surviving scrolls, including the record of the Mirror Sky Ship, that are held in private religious studies collections, notably at Tenri University and Koyasan University. Hand-copied excerpts are occasionally cited in Japanese dissertations on quote-unquote spiritual psychosis or quote-unquote early folk UFO belief. Some of the excerpts include these quotes. The shining ship makes no sound, tearing the sky. Beyond it, a forgotten voice calls us. Or, the pine needles are signs from heaven. Oh my God. Okay. I know there's a history of oracular distillation of ideas or concepts through the reading of pine needles, but god damn, man, that's just such a huge open end. I don't know. Okay. Overall, though, I find it very fascinating that this guy was talking about all this stuff in the 1930s of all times. Just very interesting. The documents, or why the trance skulls remain elusive, is due to the fact that documents are almost certainly housed in private collections or university archives, as the mentioned Tenri University's Shinshukyo Shiroshu or Koyasan University holdings, and are not digitally available or translated. Publicly published, academic writings only quote short passages, such as the shining ship makes no sound, etc., rather than providing full scans or bilingual transcripts. So the context of a lot of it is very open-ended. It's very strange. It's very ephemeral. He could have other stuff in there about, I don't know, eating kittens. So I'm not going to say fully that I think it's super cool, but until we get some more information on the dude, which would really be awesome considering the way that ufology is going, or at least certain aspects of it. It'd be very interesting to get a hold of more of this dude's ideas. Kagawa represents one of the earliest known Japanese figures who interpreted aerial luminous phenomena as spiritually intelligent. He claimed non-deific, non-Buddhist messages from sky entities. He attempted ritualized bodily ascension through both ancient and new frameworks, and created a cosmology that mirrored post-war contactee ideologies like George Hunt Williamson, Adamski, the Aetherius Society, etc. Go see the BSRF episode for more on that. While he was dismissed as mentally ill in his time, some post-war religious scholars, notably Professor Yamazaki Shinzo and Ichijo Masami later speculated that Kagawa anticipated the emergence of New Age channeling movements in Japanese UFO religions like Panawave, Genshi Shinwa, or even Ryalism's Japanese cells. Some of that we will also get into later. There are some additional nuanced details and contextual info about Seiji Kagawa and his spiritual movement that didn't fit neatly into the earlier summary. So these might help deepen the picture of his place in Japan's occult and proto-UFO landscape of the early 20th centuries. Once again, 1930s, late 1920s to mid-1930s. Very interesting. Kagawa's practices were not purely quote-unquote New Age inventions, but heavily rooted in local mountain asceticism, once again, Shugindo traditions. His use of caves near Mount Tsurugi, pine smoke, and fasting echoes classic Yamabushi training, mountain wizards. His mirror-gazing technique is believed to be an evolution of Kagura mirror divination, a Shinto ritual for invoking kami or ancestral spirits, repurposed into a, for lack of a better term, high-tech, maybe, cosmological framework. So he's got a syncretic fusion of beliefs here. Kagawa synthesized Shinto, esoteric Buddhism, and emerging Western occult ideas, notably theosophical and spiritualism ideas, filtered through Japanese religious vernacular. His quote-unquote sky beings were described less as gods and more as proto-astronauts, or advanced spirit guardians, suggesting an early ancient astronaut's influence decades before it was popularized globally. Some historians interpret Kagawa as both a religious visionary and a tragic figure of mental illness. That's probably a fair assessment, noting that his institutionalization reflected Japan's own struggle to differentiate religious experience from psychiatric disorder during rapid modernization. His case is sometimes cited in discussions of quote-unquote spiritual possession and madness in Japan, illustrating how non-normative religions' experiences were pathologized by the medical authorities at the time. The 1930s in Japan saw a growing interest in nationalist mysticism and state-sponsored spiritualism, including divination and ritual aimed at boosting military morale. Kagawa's movement likely existed, I'm going to say definitely existed, in the fringes of this milieu. And while not connected directly with militant groups, his focus on quote-unquote sky guardians and celestial missions aligns with contemporaneous nationalist rhetoric about Japan's divine role in the cosmos. This is a big thing coming up, so just get you ready. Although largely forgotten by mainstream history, Kagawa's cosmology anticipated and perhaps influenced post-war Japanese UFO cults and new religious movements, which similarly blended traditional ritual, transmediumship, and extraterrestrial themes. Researchers suggest that elements of his quote-unquote mirror sky vision survived in oral tradition and underground groups during the post-war occupation period, where open spiritual expression was heavily censored. So, having said that, there is a slight, and I'm talking probably a fraction of a percentage of a chance, slight chance.
So you're telling me there's a chance? Yeah!
That some of his beliefs or practices possibly filtered their way out into various other groups or belief systems that were around at this time. Because if you look at like for example, England in the late 1800s, Theosophy, Golden Dawn, all these groups, Society for Psychical Research, all these guys are popping up in the same, and it's weird. They all feed off of each other. They all kind of inform each other's beliefs, etc. They have connections through, and particularly in England, through high society, things like that. These, and specifically, I will say, in England's case, with intelligence agency circles. So you never know what these quote-unquote occult beliefs, like where they're coming, where they're going, what they're being potentially used for, or co-opted for, etc. But moving on, we're going to get into a concept called Genshi Shinwa. And this is very important to a lot of the mystic nationalism and ultra far right fascist esoteric belief stuff that we're going to get into soon. This is like a underlying concept to a lot of it. Genshi Shinwa translates roughly to primordial myth or primitive mythical origins in Japanese. Depending on the context, it can refer to a few overlapping but distinct things in esoteric, occult, and ultra-nationalist spiritualist thought in Japan from this time. First up is a mythological framework. Like at its most basic, Genshi Shinwa refers to the origin myths found in Japan's ancient texts, particularly the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki. These are like the oldest origins and myths and folklore of Japan. These include stories of Izanagi and Izanami, the divine creators of Japan, Amaterasu, once again the sun goddess linked to the imperial lineage, and other kami, spirits or deities whose genealogies and acts formed the mythic foundation of Japanese identity and spirituality. So this term is often invoked in like Shinto theology, nationalist or neo-Shinto discourse, or occult reinterpretations of Japan's divine origin. Watch out! During the Taisho and early Showa eras, 1910s and 1930s, and again during the rise of Japanese ultranationalism and imperial mysticism, Genshi Shinwa came to mean more than just ancient mythology. It was treated as a sacred blueprint for divine order, and by some, as encoded cosmic knowledge. This is essentially, I mean, I don't want to make a one-to-one direct comparison, but, you know, all that Aryan bullshit that the Nazis were into, this is kind of, I mean, it didn't start that way, but it was eventually co-opted and taken that way and ran with. So you can kind of see, if that helps, through that comparison, what we're getting at here. Groups like Omoto, Tenshi Seikyo, and Shindo Yofukai interpreted the Genshi Shinwa as literal cosmological truth. It became linked to lost advanced civilizations, divine bloodlines, and Atlantis-style proto-history. Some sects claim that Japan was the original Axis Mundi. That means, you know, center of the earth. And that other global religions were distortions of Japan's true divine order. So in radical circles, this is where we're getting into the, oh man, okay. So in radical circles, Genshi Shinwa evolved into a form of spiritual nationalism or imperial mysticism. And the key ideas included that the Japanese emperor, being a literal descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu, held divine authority. That Japan's destiny to spiritually and militarily unify the world under a divine cosmic order, as seen in certain Black Dragon and Black Ocean Society documents, was a huge belief. Promotion of the idea that non-Japanese people were spiritually inferior or impure, sometimes linked to eugenics or ritual cleansing. Some ultra-esoteric nationalist groups, including breakaways from Tenrikyo and early Aum Shinrikyo sympathizers, revived Genshi Shinwa narratives to justify A, secret schools for godchildren, or Kamiko. This is going to be a big thing coming up later too, where we get some really fucking weird territory. The use of ritual violence for purification and creation of spirit machines or divine transmitters. Once again, we see this idea of technology from the gods, like whether it's, you know, received through trance medium state or dreams, some non-local, regular state of consciousness where these ideas for machines and technology come through. It's very weird, very strange. Now later, parapolitical and occult fringe theorists and post-war esoteric authors reimagined Genshi Shinwa as encoding technological blueprints, cosmic maps, or hidden extraterrestrial knowledge. These versions appear in early 1970s UFO cults. And then you have groups, thinkers, and cults that embraced or reinterpreted Genshi Shinwa as either the, once again, the primordial mythology of Japan as a literal cosmic truth, encoded occult technology, divine prophecy, or a national destiny. Now, there's early religious movements, roughly late 19th, early 20th century. The aforementioned Omoto-kyo founded by Deguchi Now, who was the illiterate woman who was possessed and wrote 200,000 prophecies, and her, I believe, son or grandson, Deguchi Onisaburo. This is one of the first modern sects to fully mythologize Japanese origin stories as esoteric prophetic cosmology. Genshi Shinwa was treated as current, not ancient. This is like a thing that was happening. They were in the midst of it. There's another group called Kodo Daikyo, a state-endorsed Shinto offshoot promoting emperor worship, referencing Genshi Shinwa in imperial propaganda. Now, the influx of nationalist, mystical societies. This is where shit really kicks off from this point on. There are several lesser-known ultra-nationalist or secret societies in pre-World War II Japan. Some of these are kind of well-known, but you'll see. That demonstrated varying degrees of interest in the occult, spiritualism, esotericism, or syncretic religious nationalist mysticism. Some were paramilitary, some political. Others were more ideologically or spiritually focused, but all helped shape Japan's ultra-right ideological ecosystem leading into the 1930s and 40s. Perhaps even somewhat more troubling is the fact that several of these far-right ultra-nationalist groups still exist and continue to exert considerable political influence in contemporary Japanese politics. Maybe not some of these specific groups, but there are just a good deal of far-right ultra-nationalist groups with varying esoteric beliefs that are kicking around to this very day. So first up, we've got Genyosha, or Genyosha, the Black Ocean Society. This is a biggie. Founded in 1881 by Toyama Mitsuru, the Genyosha was an ultra-nationalist secret society that combined elements of Shinto mysticism with aggressive, and I mean aggressive, Pan-Asianism. It engaged in espionage, assassination, and political agitation to promote Japanese imperial expansion and racial superiority. The society was influenced by Kokugaku, or national learning, and Shinto-based spiritualism, aiming to revive Japan's ancient traditions and divine heritage. Next up is the Koku-ryukai, or the Black Dragon Society, another big one. An offshoot of the Genyosha, and the Koku-ryukai was established in 1901 by Uchida Ryohei. It was a prominent ultra-nationalist paramilitary group that blended Shinto mysticism with militaristic ideology. The society was involved in espionage, sabotage, assassination, particularly during the Russo-Japanese War and the annexation of Korea. It was also a huge, aggressive supporter of aggressive Pan-Asianism and lent financial support to revolutionaries such as Sun Yat-sen and Emilio Aguinaldo. A lot of these Pan-Asianism groups, especially the ones that came out of Japan, like they basically saw Japan as the daddy of all Asia, and that all the other Asian cultures essentially were like the genetic descendants, I guess you'd say, or just offshoots and factions that came down from Japanese people being the original Asian folks, I guess. I'm still the politics behind a lot of this stuff is very confusing because of the way that Japan was at war with many other Asian nations and groups, and just spouting this rhetoric at the same time. It's very confusing, very confusing. Another group is the Kodoha, the Imperial Way faction. This was active in the 1920s and 30s. It was a faction within the Imperial Japanese Army that sought to establish a military government based on spiritual and mystical ideals. Led by General Sadao Araki, the faction emphasized the revival of Japan's ancient traditions and divine heritage, incorporating elements of Shinto mysticism and esoteric beliefs into its ideology. The Kodoha was involved in the February 26 incident of 1936, which was an attempted coup to restore the emperor's direct rule. So we're not quite in the imperial era just yet with a lot of this stuff, but this is what helped usher it in. Next up is the Kinko Kukai, the National Foundation Society. Founded in 1926 by Ben Akeo and Kinku Kokai. The Kinku Kokai was an ultranationalist organization that combined elements of Shinto mysticism with fascist ideology. The society advocated for the establishment of a totalitarian state based on the emperor's sovereignty and the revival of Japan's divine heritage. It was involved in anti-communist activities and also supported Pan-Asianism, aiming to position Japan at the forefront of a new world order. Then we've got the Kokuhansha, the National Essence Society. Established in 1924 by Kiichiro Hironuma, the Kokuhansha, was a nationalist political society that promoted the concept of kokutai, or national polity, emphasizing Japan's unique spiritual and cultural identity. The society rejected Western political ideologies such as socialism and communism, advocating instead for a totalitarian state based on traditional Japanese values. It had connections to various military and political figures and was involved in efforts to suppress labor movements and, of course, leftist ideologies. You know, the more I just read of history, seems like the left got a fucking bum rap a lot of time, over and over and over. I don't know. Just a lot of suppression, a lot of whatever. I don't know, I'm not going to get into it. Finally, we've got the Kurozu Mikio, or the Kurozumi sect. This is founded in the early 19th century by Kurozumi Munetata. Hakuna Matata. Kurozu Mikio is a Shinto-derived new religious movement that emphasizes the purification of the body and mind to achieve spiritual awakening. While not explicitly ultra-nationalist, the movement's focus on Japan's divine heritage and its integration of Shinto practices have been associated with nationalist sentiments. The movement has influenced various aspects of Japanese culture and spirituality, including the development of many other new religious movements. Now, some of the more notable ultra-nationalist esotericists or occult ideologues kicking around at this time, I want to kick out just a few names here. If anyone's interested, they can further research some of these guys. The occult context on some of these guys, some of it is very, what's the word? Like, I don't know, believed to be, you know what I'm saying? Citation needed. Like, some of it's overt and some of it not so much, but are at least rumored, if not outright stated otherwise. So there's a man named Tanaka Chigaku, born 1861, died 1939. He was a Nichiren Buddhist lay reformer and the founder of the Kokuchukai, or Pillar of the Nation Society. He believed that Japan's divine mission was to spread Nichirenism globally under the emperor, the Lotus Sutra as universal law, messianic visions of Japan as a savior nation to the world. He saw the emperor as a cosmic axis mundi, like the center of the universe, like literally. His rhetoric often bordered on mystical apocalypticism, fusing Shinto myth with Lotus Sutra cosmology from Buddhism. The involvement with the... he was extremely influential on the far right. Like, he directly inspired militarist youth societies, ultra-nationalist writers, and even early fascist cells, essentially. Next up is Okawa Shumei, born 1886, died 1957. And it's weird to think that these guys were, like, still around after the war, too, and just whatever the fuck they were getting into. It's just... Some of them got right back into politics and spiritual, new religious movements, etc. He had a background as a political philosopher, a Pan-Asian theorist, and a spiritual nationalist. He believed that Japan, as leader of the Pan-Asian destiny, it was Japan's divine mission to liberate Asia from Western imperialism. He dabbled in esoteric readings of Shinto mythology. He argued Japan's kokutai, or national essence, was a metaphysical and world-redeeming force for a utopian future, as long as they got their way. He was less hands-on occult practice type dude, but served as a bridge figure. It took ultra-nationalist metaphysical myth and sort of gave it some intellectual theory, so to speak. Again, we've got the aforementioned Deguchi Onisaburo from Omoto Kyo, 1871 to 1948, co-leader of the Great Origin or Omoto religion. His beliefs blended Shinto, folk spirit possession, or Chinkan. That's the one I was trying to remember, the sort of codified spirit possession practice. It's called Chinkan. Millenarian prophecy and Western occult borrowings from theosophy, spiritualism, etc. He claimed clairvoyance, astral journeys, contact with divine beings, practice spirit writing or Fuda, or, hypergraphic trance-induced writing states of an intense variety. He had tantric-style sexual teachings woven into Omoto's cosmology. He was arrested, however, in the 1920s/1930s. I couldn't find the clear time on that. In the various government crackdowns on non-state Shinto religions taking place in that era. He had a huge influence on later new religions and indirectly on far-right mystics who took Omoto's myth of Japan as a cosmic center and ran with it. Then we've got Tanaka Mitsuomi. He's an esoteric ultra-nationalist, less widely known but tied to the Black Dragon secret society circles. He interpreted Kokutai, or the national polity, as an occult mystical force, Japan as the hidden center of the world. He was associated with ki and psychic energy training for nationalist militants, so we're talking like psychic super soldiers, essentially, is what this guy was at least alleged to be interested in. Often cited in conspiracy literature, but primary sources are scarce. He seems to have been a bridge between spiritual martial arts training and various nationalist clubs, which there does exist some material out there to draw connections between those two concepts. But once again, it's like with the Green Dragon Society or the Vril Society and all this shit that comes out post World War II. A lot of it is unverified myth making, and that's cool if you want to do that or whatever. But don't go around trying to pass it off as real fucking history. Okay, that's just we can play tabletop RPGs all goddamn day. Don't try to pass it off as real history. Fucking things up. Anywho, there's another individual by the name of Kita-Iki, 1883 to 1937, a revolutionary ultranationalist writer executed after the 1936 coup attempt. He and some fellow travelers didn't end well for them. He wanted radical restructuring of Japan, emperor-centered socialism, anti-capitalist but imperialist. He was not a magician per se, but he infused his works with prophetic, quasi-messianic literature and was later interpreted by spiritualist fascist cells as a martyr prophet. He is the intellectual inspiration to military occult nationalists, though his own practice was political rather than esoteric. Next, we've got Hirai Kinza, 1859 to 1916. Early esoteric Buddhist and nationalist reformer involved in modernizing Buddhism. He was trying to reconcile Buddhism with nationalist Shinto and Japan's quote-unquote divine mission. He advocated meditation, esoteric Buddhist ritual, and ki or chi training as part of national strengthening. He was more low profile, but he helped shape the early occult Buddhism and nationalism synthesis that others like Chigaku and Omoto expanded upon in their own times as well. Now, a few notes on these syncretic fascist spiritualist groups in Japan. Unlike Western occult groups like the Golden Dawn or the Thule Gesellschaft, these Japanese organizations were typically not systemized into magical orders, but they did hold esoteric cosmologies about Japan's divine origins. They employed rites, symbols, oaths, and initiatory hierarchies. They combined imperial myth, militarism, Buddhism, Shinto, and Taoist elements, and many believed the emperor was a living god, and Japan's destiny was to unite the world, both spiritually and politically, by any means necessary. There's other post-war fringe techno-spiritualist movements like Mahikari or House of Light, I believe that's what it translates to, who claimed the universe had a divine order rooted in Japan's creation myths. This mixed with like light energy healing and karmic purification rituals. There's the Sekai Kyosai Kyo, which focused on spirit purification via something called Jore, which is a channeling of divine light energy. Some elements refer to ancient mythic cycles and spiritual hierarchies from the above mentioned Genchi Shinwa. There are alleged ties between some of these groups, these fringe groups, with various international UFO groups as well. But once again, spotty at best. Now this stuff, this is both scary but also kind of cool as shit. I'm on the fence about it. There's a not necessarily a group, but an idea called Tachikawa Ryu Revivalists. Now, Tachikawa Ryu, or just Tachikawa as it's mostly known, is a heretical tantric Buddhist offshoot with some esoteric groups in the 1970s and 80s trying to reconnect tantric sex with primordial Japanese myths. Now, Tachikawa Ryu, often translated as the Tachikawa school or Tachikawa lineage, and it was a controversial esoteric Buddhist sect that originated in medieval Japan. It became infamous for its association with ritual sex, symbolic death practices, and tantric imagery, leading to its eventual suppression by mainstream Buddhist authorities. In later decades, particularly the 20th century, Tachikawa revivalism appeared as fringe groups and occultists rediscovered and reinterpreted its lore, often fusing it with New Age, Shinto, and militaristic or nationalistic beliefs. Now, the founder of this group was a man by the name of Ninkan, a Shingon monk and disciple of the Shingon patriarch Kukai, or Kobodaishi, founded the Tachikawa Ryu in the early 12th century after his exile. The core practices of this group, oh man, get ready for this. Ritualized sexual union between male and female practitioners, seen as symbolic of cosmic dualities. Okay, that's, basic Tantra type stuff right there. Use of skulls, blood, and symbolic death in initiation rites. Fucking metal. Visualizations involving sexualized deities, such as Aizen Miyu, a love fertility deity, and Dainichi Nyorai. So basically, meditational sex with gods and kami's, I guess god forms, assumption of god forms, etc. Emphasis on esoteric mandalas, lunar cycles, right, ladies, and inner alchemy. By the 13th century, the sect was declared heretical by Shingon orthodoxy. Documents were burned and followers were purged. However, there's this idea, 20th century Tachikawa revivalism. Several figures and ultra-nationalist spiritual movements attempted to revive or reinterpret Tachikawa Ryu in new, often syncretic forms during the late Taisho and early Showa periods. These revivals coincided with increased state interest in psycho-spiritual control, imperial esotericism, and racial/mystical supremacy theories. There's sort of notable aspects to this is like a militarized tantra. Like some interpretation fused Tachikawa ritual sex practices with ideas of spiritual purity and eugenic destiny, believing that elite spiritual intercourse could birth quote-unquote divine children for the empire. These fringe sects shared ideas with the Black Dragon Society, its offshoots, and Pan-Asianist mystics, viewing the emperor as living Dainichi and Japan as the center of cosmic energy. Channelers and cult engineers experimented with quote-unquote cosmic machinery based on ancient Tachikawa diagrams, supposedly meant to amplify willpower, weather manipulation, or battlefield control. Now, I found a lot of stuff trying to, it almost seems, reverse engineer connections between this group with Unit 731. Unit 731 and occult thought or belief in general. While there's there's like fringe people who have theorized or suspected, but several revivalist sects around Tachikawa's doctrines intersected with groups involved in biological experimentation, eugenics, and potentially psychotronic weaponry. There was experimental breeding. Both occult groups and Unit 731 were rumored to pursue controlled reproduction experiments, with Unit 731 rumored to study mystical genetics and quote-unquote psychic traits in children from certain cult families. Tachikawa influence groups believed sexual tantra could produce soldiers immune to torture or fear, paralleling Unit 731's interest in testing human limits. Now, this is all largely conjectural, I will say. But if you want to link any kind of potential occult or esoteric thought to Unit 731, it would be related to bloodlines and occult eugenics, things of that nature. So take this with a ritual bath of of Epsom salts. Some of this stuff still survives in fringe circles, and while it's still taboo, Tachikawa Ryu is occasionally referenced by Japanese occult historians and conspiracy theorists. Some neo-esoteric Buddhist sects, especially those influenced by modern Tantra or Jungian psychology, certain nationalist or spiritualist cults claiming access to quote-unquote forbidden Shingon knowledge. And there's academic rediscovery as well. Scholars like Bernard Fowler, I believe is how you say it, and James Sanford have written extensively on the demonization of the sect and its role in the politics of orthodoxy and sexuality. This is a shadowy, very fascinating corner of Japanese esoteric and political history. In the 1930s and 40s, Tachikawa Ryu revivalism appeared not as a formal school, but as a set of covert ideas, ritual symbols, and speculative imperial tantric, quote-unquote, philosophies, woven into spiritual ultra-nationalist and militarist fringe groups. And while few declared themselves explicitly as Tachikawa Ryu adherents due to the sect's overall taboo status, several key figures and organizations drew directly from or were influenced by its imagery and doctrine, particularly the symbolic use of sexual alchemy, skull rituals, and cosmic duality. These include, and I'm going to say possibly on this one, possibly, Shiro Ishii, the head of Unit 731. While not a Tachikawa adherent per se, Ishii was reportedly influenced by radical interpretations of, quote, purity through ritual impurity, unquote. I hesitate to think, in the mind of a man like Shiro Ishii, what exactly that means. But it's a concept aligned with both Tachikawa's sexual and death rites. His experiments on pregnant women and the childbearing were believed by some to be tied to sacred bloodline eugenics, possibly drawing from fringe esoteric texts circulating in Manchuria at the time. There's another individual by the name of Okawa Shumei, an ultra-nationalist philosopher, pan-Asianist ideologue, and suspected spiritual advisor to many military leaders. He was a known scholar of esoteric Buddhism and the Lotus Sutra. Okawa flirted with ritual mysticism and emphasized Japan's spiritual destiny. Some of his unpublished works, confiscated post-war, reference like mandala sexual symbolism, and he was rumored to be fascinated by forbidden Shingon paths, which is a likely reference to Tachikawa or some form of esoteric Buddhist tantric practice and various derived material relating to such ideas. Next up is Seicho no Ie, which is, I believe, a group that was founded by an individual named Masaharu Taniguchi. Yes, he was the founder of this New Thought-inspired Shinto-Buddhist hybrid movement, Seicho no Ie. While not overtly Tachikawa-based, his early mystical writings dabbled in symbolic union of cosmic male-female principles, an idea central to Tachikawa's sex rites. Taniguchi's group was part of the broader in which revivalist and nationalist occult ideas circulated. And then there are various Nichiren-based militarist cults, or Nichiren Kanon-ha, hyper-nationalist Buddhist offshoots active during wartime Japan. Certain fringe groups attempted to merge Nichirenist apocalypticism with Shingon Tantra, drawing from suppressed texts that included Tachikawa diagrams and sexual iconography. A few even held secret rituals involving skulls and visualizations of Dainichi Nyorai in a sexual embrace or tantric yab yum, echoing the band Tachikawa rites. The Black Dragon Society, or Kokuryukai, had allegedly, an occult fringe wing. I can't verify all of this, but once again, there's a lot of post-World War II myth-making thrown in this. So once again, take some of this with a cube of fried tofu. The group's inner circle, not the mainline leadership, allegedly dabbled in tantric ritual sexual energy cultivation and genealogical purity, all of which mirror Tachikawa concerns with sex, bloodlines, and the cosmic legitimacy of the Japanese emperor. Some post-war testimonies from defectors reference skull cups and womb/blood rites linked to ancient Mikyo. Mikyo is another term for esoteric Buddhism, essentially. Shingon, heretical Shingon. Hiraoka Kotaro, an occult nationalist, military officer, and collector of esoteric documents. He's believed to have translated or preserved a version of the Tachikawa skull mandala, which depicted a sexualized image of Aizen Mu, who is I believe, a folk kami that is related to iron and metalwork, and ritual instructions involving sexual fluids and skulls. His influence on Japanese secret societies and wartime ideological think tanks is murky but significant. There is another individual, an unnamed Yamato Kagura revivalist in Tottori and Okayama. These were basically rural spiritualist cells blending Shinto Kagura, folk tantra, and militarist prophecy. These groups revived ritual dances and sexualized initiations based on, quote, Yamato purification rites, unquote, that strongly resembled Tachikawa-style visualizations and sex magic. Some researchers believe these cells were used for breeding experiments connected to psychic warfare projects or racial purity cults. I'm going to put a big maybe, if allegedly, supposedly on that, but we're going to talk about some stuff later that makes that sound not so fucking crazy, so just letting you know ahead of time. There are unnamed advisors in the Manchurian Strategic Research Bureau from 1937 to 1942, spiritual advisors embedded in intelligence and colonial research divisions in Manchukuo, known to have experimented with psychic training, ritual sexuality, and Tachikawa-inspired diagrams believed to influence soul weather or emotional control. Some were reportedly connected to, once again, Unit 731 sub-projects involving sex-based energetic conditioning, but this, once again, this smacks of post-war mythologization. I only include it because, once again, it's the inclusion of this sacred bloodlines, eugenic, child-rearing, pseudo-occultism type stuff. It's going to come into play a little bit here. So just, I hesitate to throw too much legitimacy on some of it, but these ideas were floating around. We'll say that. I don't know if they were essentially codified and being practiced as a formed ideological, a practice. I don't know. It's strange, but we'll get into some stuff that has CIA documentation to kind of connect some of this stuff. Several documents relating to Tachikawa Ryu revivalists were confiscated by the GHQ, aka the U.S. Occupation Forces post-war. The documents referenced skull sutras, red mandalas, and ancestral womb visualization manuals. Some of the Tachikawa revival interests carried over into Japanese new religions, or Shinshukyo, groups like Eigon Shu and Mahikari, Aum Shinrikyo's tantric training programs, which borrowed heavily from medieval esoteric Buddhism and apocalyptic blood rites, allegedly. Various UFO and Genshi Shinwa engineers, quote-unquote, not always organized groups, but individuals who believed the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki hid spiritual blueprints for technologies such as spirit energy reactors, divine communication machines, chakra fusion devices, or cosmic translators. Oddly enough, some of this is linked to Brazilian-based techno-spiritist engineers who revered Japanese Atlantis theories. Go figure. Also, if you look at the whole certain periods in history of Japan where you have these kofu or kofun burial sites, these burial mounds and monolithic structures that are still very scarcely understood to this day. I don't know, it just lends some slight credence to there's some kind of unknown, at least to the regular folk, I guess. I mean, all these places are off limits and denied to anyone except like the imperial families, as far as I know. So, strange. 1934. Reports surface of a rogue sect blending pseudo-Shintoism with spirit photography used to extort grieving families. This one's a bit out of chronological order with the previous and following cases, but that's only because it leads into some truly mind-bending, insanely, and I hesitate to say cool shit, but I'm not gonna lie, what comes after this case spirals straight into just bonkers ass real life anime territory. So, 1934, spirit photography extortion cult in the Tokyo, Yokohama region. Several Tokyo area newspapers reported of a quote-unquote new spiritual cult claiming to channel divine messages from the kami using spirit photography. Now, this is separate from... well, we'll get there, hold on. The group offered grief-stricken families a ritualized photographic service said to reveal images of dead loved ones, especially children, if proper rites were followed. Victims were asked to bring personal belongings of the deceased, participate in a short Shinto-style ritual, and then pose for spiritual photographs with the mediums, just like Santa Claus at Christmas. Images were allegedly manipulated using double exposure and chemical distortion techniques, though these were presented as authentic evidence of spirit interaction. Families were told that if the spirits appeared in anguish or shrouded in darkness, they were not at rest and required expensive follow-up ceremonies to prevent possession or misfortune. One mother reported being told her son's spirit was drowning in karmic sin and was coerced into paying over 180 yen, that's 1,100 US dollars, modern equivalent, for purification. Threats of spiritual harm were made. In some cases, families were warned that the failure to pay for proper rites could result in illness, death, or even spirit attacks on younger family members. Whole lot of scaremongering going on, essentially. The cult operated semi-openly in Tokyo's Asakusa and Yokohama's Isezaki-cho districts under the name Shinko Shashin Kyokai, or New Light Photographic Society, later dubbed by the press as the Ghost Lens Temple. I think that's a cooler name. An expose in the Yomiuri Shimbun newspaper, September 1934, triggered a minor police crackdown. A Tokyo Metropolitan Police memo, reproduced in a 1998 academic article by one Aiji Sakai, noted that several quote-unquote priest photographers were arrested under commercial fraud statutes, though most served minimal jail time. Some of the more notable individuals in this group include one by the name of Master Inoue, the group's supposed founder, who claimed to receive instruction from a kami named Seiryu no O, said to govern the boundary between the spirit and physical worlds. There's a character by the name of Yukio Tanabe, who was a female disciple of Inoue, known for tearful public displays and photographic divinations. She was the drama queen of the group. Her sensational testimony during the fraud hearings further pushed spirit photography into tabloid territory. Now, there's another occult tech blend here. It's this guy Inoue reportedly claimed to possess a spirit lens that could focus quote-unquote divine ether light, a term possibly influenced by Western spiritualist language and suspiciously similar to European theosophical beliefs. His camera was supposedly blessed at the shrine of Inari, major Shinto kami, and he used electromagnetic coils and incense burners around the dark room to quote-unquote attract wandering spirits. If you'd like to hear more on pre-World War II ninja or thoughtography or spirit photography, as well as what was much of the real-life basis for the story behind the Ring or Ringu, see my old-ass episode on Shizuko Mifune. These spiritualist photography groups were essentially associated with how to put it? It was through this group, I believe, that later associations were found to a crime known as the 1933 Osaka child disappearance. This is a real case, and it does connect to spirit medium beliefs, though it's more often classified as a superstition-related murder than an organized cult killing. But here's what's documented. Early 1933, in a working-class neighborhood of Osaka, several children were reported missing over a short span. Contemporary press often highlights one particularly shocking case, though police records indicate multiple disappearances. Eventually, police traced one case to a female spiritualist/medium, described as a Miko or an Atako in different papers, though, once again, those at the time, those phrases are interchangeable. The medium claimed that she could cure illness and misfortune through spirit possession and offerings to the kami. She insisted that a child sacrifice was necessary to appease spirits and cure a wealthy client's chronic illness. One young girl, around 5 or 6 years old, was taken by the medium under the guise of, quote unquote, using her as a spiritual offering. The child was killed. Methods vary in reporting. Some say suffocation, others blunt force trauma, possibly as part of a, quote unquote, purification rite. The body was concealed in the medium's residence, but discovered during police searches, prompted by parental outcry. The medium was arrested and convicted of murder. Several of her followers and clients were investigated for complicity, though only she received a heavy sentence, and the press dubbed her the Witch of Osaka in sensational coverage. This is part of a cluster of child sacrifice / superstition murders in the early 1930s. Osaka, being urban, sort of gave the case much wider press coverage than the other previously mentioned quote-unquote occult murders earlier on in this episode. And it was used by reformists to once again argue for stricter control of folk mediums and superstition businesses. Authorities framed it as another example of the dangerous underbelly of popular shamanism and unlicensed fortune-telling in Japan. This is verified as mentioned in the Japanese police crime digest of the Showa era. The period Osaka papers, the Osaka Mainichi Shimbun, covered it as a lurid child sacrifice for a cult cure story. Post-war criminology surveys listed as one of the defining pre-war superstition crimes involving mediums. Now, this is another one that has a sort of alternate narrative to it that leads into some other certain weird places. Some say that the child vanished after a seance attended at the center for this group with her grandmother sometime between 9:30 p.m. and dawn. Witnesses claim to have seen her last near the shrine garden behind the medium's house. The grandmother, confused or frightened, returned the next morning to find the gathering place cleared out, with only the primary spirit medium being the only one there. She was arrested within 24 hours, but due to a lack of physical evidence or a confession, she was released several days later. The Yomiuri Shimbun and Mainichi Daily News both ran sensational follow-ups in July 1933, quoting unnamed police sources who believed there was, quote, an informal network of spiritualist homes or sanctuaries, ostensibly for housing orphans and abandoned children, but in truth, operating outside all legal accountability. These so-called Reijutsuka no Ie, or houses of spirit arts, were often tied to fringe religious circles, and some allegedly functioned like quote-unquote foster cults, places where children were quote-unquote trained as mediums or kept under strict mystical discipline. No concrete evidence was produced connecting this network to this disappearance, but it triggered increased scrutiny of independent female mediums operating in Osaka, Kyoto, and Kobe, etc. A criminal report from 1936, compiled by criminologist Kosaka Masakazu, later referenced the case as part of a broader pattern of disappearances involving koketsu shugi, or bloodline purification cults. Some contemporary historians of Japanese religion link these homes to predecessors of Reien cult groups in post-war Japan, which also ran quasi-communal orphanages or, quote-unquote, schools for spiritually gifted children. Female mediumship and child care exploitation, the blending of new religious movements and underground networks, karmic purification practices targeting children and dependents, comparisons with later cults such as Aum Shinrikyo or early Tenshi Seikyo. A lot of this stuff, it goes to some dark places. So several unofficial spiritist homes or training centers connected to groups like the aforementioned Tenshi Seikyo or its splinter groups were rumored in Osaka, Kyoto, and surrounding areas to have taken in abandoned or missing children. These children were purportedly raised or indoctrinated as mediums, often kept in isolated conditions under strict ritual discipline. While official records are limited, contemporary press reports from the 1930s once again hinted at a network of such houses operating under the guise of spiritual training, with some children vanishing mysteriously or being unreachable by authorities. The 1933 Osaka child disappearance case is the most notable example where an 8-year-old girl disappeared after a seance attended by her grandmother, and the medium was arrested but released without charges. It was widely suspected the child was taken into one of these spiritist homes. Though no definitive murder charges were ever filed against the Tenchi Seikyo members, several deaths during ritual practices were reported as accidental or due to negligence, including fatal fasting episodes during purification ceremonies, deaths related to extreme trance or possession states causing physical collapse. There are anecdotal accounts from former members and local informants describing harsh discipline or punishment within the groups that sometimes led to severe injury or unexpected fatalities. Due to fear of police and societal backlash, many incidents were quietly settled or covered up by group leadership. Some scholars argued that the patterns of child disappearances and abuses within Tenchi Seikyo and related groups set precedents for more overt cult violence and child exploitation seen in post-war Japan's more notorious religious cults, such as Aum Shinrikyo. They're, though, very different in ideology and scale. This historical context helps explain the persistent association of spiritist homes with child endangerment and ritual abuse in Japanese social memory. This also leads into a particularly fascinating, though quite just horrifying, subject of supposed special schools for spiritually gifted children. Places where children believed to have psychic or mediumistic abilities were gathered and trained. And it is indeed a notable phenomenon in Japan's religious and quote-unquote occult history. The idea is not exclusively post-World War II. In fact, early 20th century spiritualist groups, including those connected to the aforementioned Tenchi Seikyo and other new religious movements or Shinshukyos, already established formal or informal quote-unquote training centers or spiritist homes, aka Reijutsuka no Ie, where children thought to have spiritual sensitivities were gathered together. These homes often served as communal living spaces where children underwent ritual training, mediumship development, and spiritual quote-unquote purification. However, these pre-war institutions were often small, clandestine, and loosely organized, and records are sparse. After 1945, with the loosening of government religious restrictions and the rise of numerous new religions, the scale of visibility of such schools increased significantly. Groups like Seito no Ie and Mahikari sects and others sometimes ran formalized spiritual schools or centers for gifted children, often emphasizing healing powers, psychic development, or divine missions. These institutions sometimes operated openly and attracted wider attention, both positive and critical. Children were often identified by signs like unusual sensitivity, trances, prophetic dreams, or spontaneous mediumship. Sometimes families voluntarily dedicated children. In other cases, children were brought or sent by local spiritual leaders. Training typically included meditation and prayer to refine spiritual sensitivity, ritual chanting and invocation to develop mediumistic abilities, karmic and ancestral cleansing rituals, and sometimes ascetic practices like fasting, isolation, etc. Conditions varied. Some schools were supportive communities, others had harsh discipline or exploitative regimes. Reports exist of physical punishment, forced labor, or strict control over personal freedoms, especially in more secretive or radical groups. Allegations of neglect, abuse, and exploitation have been made, especially concerning smaller, unregulated schools. The 1930s Osaka case mentioned earlier is an example, but post-war police investigations increased, leading to crackdowns on unlicensed spiritual schools involved in child abuse or fraud. Children from these schools sometimes faced social ostracism or were labeled as cursed or possessed, complicating their integration or reintegration into society. There were Mahikari-related centers known for purification rites and spiritual gifts of education, basically. The Seicho no Ie schools focused on harmonizing spiritual and physical development, sometimes including children's spiritual training. Independent spiritist homes, often unregistered, linked to smaller cults or mediumistic families, or sometimes operating under the radar. The phenomenon ties deeply into Japanese folk beliefs about possession and spiritual inheritance, blending ancient ideas with modern religious innovation. It also reflects broader cultural anxieties about childhood, purity, and social conformity in a rapidly modernizing Japan. Now, these Reijutsuka no Ie, these are small houses run by female mediums or families claiming inherited spiritual power. These homes took in abandoned or orphaned children believed to be quote-unquote gifted or spiritually sensitive. Children were subjected to intense ritual training, including trance induction, chanting, and fasting. Former residents spoke of physical punishment if they failed to quote-unquote channel spirits correctly. Some recalled being isolated from normal society and forbidden to speak of their experiences outside. Police raids in 1933 and 1935 disrupted several such homes, but lack of formal evidence limited prosecutions. There were the Mahikari sects. These groups, originating in the late 1940s, established centers to train children in quote-unquote divine light practices, aiming to purify spiritual energy and develop psychic abilities. Regular group meditation and quote-unquote light transmission sessions were the daily order. Learning to identify spiritual impurities in the self and others, I'm sure that went swimmingly well. Ethical teachings about serving society through spiritual gifts. The reports of emotional manipulation and intense discipline, as well as allegations of children being separated from families for extended periods during training camps. Former members described both positive experiences, community, purpose, etc., and negative ones, such as pressure, the fear of failure, and I'm sure the consequences thereof. The Saicho no Ie and similar groups, founded in the 30s, incorporated spiritual education for youth as part of a holistic development. They put emphasis on harmonizing mind, body, and spirit through prayer and meditation, and encouragement of personal revelation and spiritual intuition in children. Generally, they were seen as more mainstream and less controversial, but still faced criticism from conservative circles for promoting unorthodox ideas to children. The survivor eyewitness accounts state, quote, "At the spiritist home, we had to be still for hours, waiting for spirits to possess us. If we moved or whispered, we were beaten." There's a former girl in Osaka location, 1930s. Quote, "The teachers told us we were special because of the spirits inside us, but if we couldn't, quote-unquote, hear them, we were worthless." That was a Mahikari trainee from the 1960s. Another one says, quote, "I learned to send the divine light to my classmates. Sometimes it felt like a burden rather than a gift." There was a Seichi no Iyo youth participant from the 1970s. Criminologist Kosaka Masakazu in 1936 noted a pattern of child exploitation in spiritist homes with a recommendation for stricter police oversight. The government monitored and occasionally banned unlicensed spiritual training centers, citing child welfare concerns. Yanagita Kunio in the 1950s documented community ambivalence towards child mediums. They were respected as sacred, but feared for potential social disruption. There was a child medium expulsion from a Nagoya cult in the late 1930s, a rural cult centered around the Yorimashi possession rituals, as mentioned at the top of the episode. A young girl repeatedly possessed by spirits was blamed for a string of misfortunes in the community. Villagers reportedly pressured the family to send her away. She was the vessel of an angry god, but her presence only brought illness. They said it was safer if she left the village, quote unquote. The child was sent to a distant spiritist home where conditions are unknown. Some spiritist homes, esoteric training groups, and quote-unquote gifted child programs in pre-war and wartime Japan were actually absorbed, formally or informally, into the broader framework of the imperial, military, or ultra-nationalist ideological apparatus. While this wasn't always explicitly acknowledged, there is compelling evidence that certain esoteric child training programs were seen as having military-adjacent utility during the 1930s and early 1940s. And it's with that succulent, isn't that the plot line behind Akira? Yes, it is. And some of this shit really happened. And this is where we're going to cut off. I'm sorry to leave you hanging on such a crazy note, but we're going to come back next episode. Otherwise, it's just going to be too long, too crazy. And I want to give you some incentive to come back because this shit gets insane. So yeah, come back next week. We're going to get into, oh boy, CIA documents that confirm that there were some weird child psychic soldier training programs going on in Japan during World War II and leading up to, and quite possibly afterwards as well. GCHQ, just wow. Yeah, it goes into even more strange places after that. And then we'll probably, from there kick on to, post-war stuff. I've got a couple very strange addendums to to bring us to modern day, but this is going to be the kookiest shit I think a lot of people have ever heard, because I don't know how many people are familiar with the idea of these psychic child soldier training programs, but this era in Japan and certain eras in the not too distant history of China have been deep into this shit. We're going to get into it, with Japan at least. China's down the road. That's going to be a big one. So I want to thank you for listening. My name is Michael Lucht. This is Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast, the podcast. And we'll be back soon with part 2 of the Occult Crime Atlas Japan. And once again, I just want to say that the reason I include all this imperialist mystical thought and ideology is because it eventually leads to you-know-what. So I'm just double plus good, making sure that it's understood why it's thrown in there. I thank you guys for listening. I thank you guys for tuning in each week. I really appreciate it. You make me feel like not a natural woman, but something beyond, like a wolf mother from the sky, here to devour the moon. And it's great. I love it. It's a good feeling. I only get that from you guys. So thank you again for your likes and your subscribes and your this, that, and the other thing. But real quick, I wanted to say, I don't know if any other people out there listening to my channel are familiar. Have you ever gotten several emails from people saying that if you pay them money, your videos will have hundreds of thousands of hits all of a sudden? Because I've gotten a couple of these, and you know what? You might knock their hustle. That's fine. You have a business. You figured it out. But it makes me wonder how many of these channels engage with these services. Because I don't know. It just seems maybe I have integrity. It'll be the only time you'll ever hear myself or anyone else conflate me with integrity. No, it's just weird. I don't know. I mean, I thought about doing it, but seems kind of wrong. Let me know what you think. I don't know. We'll see. It's odd. It's very odd. It makes me wonder how the whole system's going on behind all this stuff. But whatever. Don't knock the hustle. Anyways, thanks for listening. See you again next week, and keep your imperial ideologies to yourselves. Talk it over with a friend, all your loved ones. Make sure, is this something you really want to have cooking inside your head? Thank you. See you next week.